Grace and peace to you in the name of the risen Jesus, who brings to you today and every day shalom. So I'm going to begin this morning by showing you some pictures. These are some shadows, and I want you to see if you can guess what these shadows represent, what they portray. The first one this morning, I think it's pretty easy. You're going to be able to get it relatively easy. I think you see in the picture three adorable little children holding hands. Let's see if you can get this next one. It might be a bit more difficult. This is another one. What's it a shadow of? Well, that's a shadow of a car. A car. The next one, again, another easy one. What's this one a shadow of? You probably have a bunch of these in your yard. You see here in this picture a shadow of a tree. A tree, that one was pretty easy. Now the next one is going to be the hardest one. What's this one a shadow of? I'm sure you probably see it there. That's a cat, right? Any of you own cats out there? Patty and I have long since given up on cats. The last cat that we owned, I believe its name was Fleetwood, if I remember it correctly. Fleetwood thought much too highly of itself. And we're going to come back to that in just a little bit, so keep that in your brain this morning. Shadows. Shadows are very interesting things. Shadows tell us something about the shape, the size, the contours of what we're looking at. And shadows are a good way for us to understand much of the Old Testament, especially the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses. Now, this is what Hebrews chapter 10, verse 1 says. It says, the old system, that's the system of altars and sacrificial animals and the high priest and the tabernacle. That old system in the Torah, the teaching of Moses in Genesis through Deuteronomy, that's just a shadow. The old system under the Torah of Moses was only a shadow, a dim preview of the good things to come, not the good things themselves. And the artwork that you see on your screen as well as on your bulletin cover this morning, that artwork actually tells us quite graphically what the good things to come actually are. What is the good thing still to come? Well, that would be the death of Jesus for you and for me. That's the good thing to come. Shadows. Shadows, that's a good way for us to understand the book of Leviticus. So as we go into this joyful Easter season, we pause for more than just a moment to look at the book of Leviticus, the third book of Moses. So as I've promised for about a year now, for the next 6 weeks, we're going to look at Leviticus under this title, Shadows. Shadows, coming from Hebrews 10, verse 1, shadows of the Savior. We're going to start in chapter 3 of Leviticus, verses 1 to 5. This is all about the so-called peace offering. The peace offering is a shadow of the Savior. Peace, shalom in Hebrew, is what we see in Leviticus 3, 1 to 5, but we see peace only as a shadow. Only a shadow. Now, peace, when I say that word, what is it that comes to your mind? Some of you might be thinking, something along the lines of, terrorists not setting off a bomb somewhere. You think of peace as the absence of warfare. You think of peace as, at least we're not screaming and hollering at each other anymore. We've got a little peace. Well, that's not what the Hebrew word shalom, translated peace, means. It doesn't mean the absence of warfare, no. It means the presence of healing. Presence of healing. Isaiah 53, verse 5 helps us out here. The prophet writes, the punishment that brought us peace, shalom, was upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. So peace is God's gift of healing. Shalom restores, shalom renews, shalom repairs. Another way we might be able to understand God's gift of peace is through a cracked egg. Humpty Dumpty, you all know Humpty Dumpty. His parents told him, I'm sure, but he didn't listen. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, and of course, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put that darn egg back together again, but shalom can. God's gift of peace restores, repairs, renews, it heals. So in Leviticus 3, verses 1 to 5, when God gives us the gift of shalom, He is guaranteeing us that the broken, messy, sticky fragments of our lives are going to be put back together again. And who doesn't need that? There was a study done back in 2016. This study asked tens of thousands of Americans about their mental health, and most of them had not been, to the Colorado mountains or to the beaches of Florida for a week or so. They were just sort of rank and file people, just like me and you. And this study showed that at least 117 million American adults have had or continue to have high levels of anxiety. They feel as though their lives are just falling apart. So think about that. 117 million Americans at some point in their life feel as though life is unbearable. I just can't go on. It's that dark. The World Health Organization, which did this survey, tells us that the United States of America, being the most wealthy nation in the world, is also, ironically, the most depressed nation in the world. Money can't buy me love. Money can't buy me happiness. Just listen to what people are saying. People say, it's just too tough for me out there. I don't think that I can go on. I'm not sure that life is worth it anymore. I don't see God at all. I feel like David against Goliath. And did you know this? Since 2016, 25 new drugs are on the market in North America that will help you with anxiety. It's an epidemic. So what does society offer us when we feel like we are Humpty Dumpty and it's just all a big ooey gooey, sticky, impossible mess? Well, you've heard what people say. One group over here says, buy a bigger house. Another group says, well, you need to get a prettier blouse. A third group says, you need a different spouse. And finally, another group says, quit being such a big, lazy louse. And we believe it, don't we? Oh, yeah, a bigger house, a brighter blouse, a new spouse, quit being a louse. Those things will work, right? Well, it doesn't. It doesn't work. None of those things work. It's like trying to nail Jell-O to a wall. It just doesn't work. It seems as though finally nothing works. Nothing is going to put Humpty Dumpty back together again. Well, think again. Think again, because God gives the gift of shalom. Shalom, remember, not the absence of warfare. No, it's the presence of healing, restoration, repair, renewal. And how does God do that? Well, He does it through Leviticus chapter 3, verses 1 to 5. We're going to work through these verses this morning with an equation in a formula format. In other words, there are going to be three pieces to this equation, and the equation is going to then equal something. It's God's formula for shalom. So here we go. The first piece of the equation, if you want shalom, is a perfect sacrifice. If you want shalom, if you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, then you need a perfect sacrifice. Perfect. This is how Leviticus chapter 3 begins. If you present an animal from the herd as a peace offering, a shalom offering to the Lord. So these Israelites, they knew what it was like to have their lives broken into a billion pieces. They said, oh, well, let's do this. Let's get an animal from the herd and go before the Lord. Now, this animal, it may be male or female, but it must have no defects. Perfect sacrifice. No blemishes, no defects. It can't be blind, it can't be lame, can't be limping. Forget going to Walmart or Target or Kmart for one of these perfect offerings. Forget going online and buying a used one from Amazon. No, you need to have the best of the best. The prized animal in your herd, the most precious and valuable animal that you have in your flock. You want shalom? Well, this is where you start. You start with a perfect sacrifice. Next, Leviticus chapter 3 tells us that you need a confession of sin. You need a confession of sins. Our text continues, lay your hand on the animal's head. Now, what's that all about? I mean, are you going to pet the animal? No, that's not what you're doing. This was the Old Testament way of confessing your sin. I'm placing all of my muck and my mire and my mistakes on the head of the animal. So you confess your sin, and then you slaughter it at the entrance of the tabernacle. So if I want shalom, then I need to confess any part that I have in the mess. And I know it's hard. I do. That's why we cry about it. I know. So there certainly are some times that the mess isn't a result of my mistake at all. Sometimes we're just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and life just breaks up into a million pieces. But most of the time, if we're honest with ourselves, most of the time the mess has to do in a very large part with what I've done. The mess is of my own cause. I haven't listened well enough. I haven't prayed enough. I haven't been patient enough. I haven't trusted Jesus enough. There's usually a part that I've played in my mess, and so if I want shalom in my life, then I need to come clean with my part. Have you ever noticed that when it comes to confessing sin, that there is one animal that does it the very best and another animal that does it the very worst? I noticed this several years ago. Patty and I have always been dog people. Our latest dogs, little Pearl and Riley, who's no longer with us, dogs are very easy when it comes to confessing sin. Cats, on the other hand, again, as I said, our last cat many years ago, Fleetwood, you were more likely to see that cat. You weren't very likely to see that cat confessing sin at all. That cat, if it could speak, would say, yeah, I did it, so what? I'm proud of it. You all probably know this. If you've ever come home and you've seen that your dog has sinned, it's committed high treason, you walk in and that dog looks at you with this fawning spirit, but you can tell that dog is guilty of something. Because the dog's eyes are darting back and forth. It won't look directly at you. Its ears are down, its head is down, and its tail is between her legs. And all you have to do, once you spot the crime, the mess on the floor, the broken whatnot, the chewed up shoe, once you've spotted the crime, all you have to do to crush that dog's fawning spirit is look down at that dog and with a firm voice say, did you do this? How could you? An instant canine collapse ensues. That dog will throw herself on your mercy. Cats, good luck with that. Cats, they shirk any sort of responsibility. Cats are too proud to confess. Cats are too distant to aloof. Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, invites us to come clean, to confess our part in the mess, to not be proud and pompous and distant and accusatory, pointing the finger, blaming other people. No, confess. Yeah, I did that. It was me. That was a bad choice. That was a bad decision. What happens? What happens when you lay your hand on the animal and confess your sin? That animal takes it all away. It takes it all away. Isn't that great? I mean, who wouldn't want a deal like that? You take all of the brokenness, all of your pain, all of your sin, you put it all on that animal. Now you lay your hand on the head of that animal and you confess your sin. So you have a perfect sacrifice plus a confession of sin. Well, you need something else. Remember, I told you that there are 3 parts to this equation, and the third part is we need the shedding of blood. The shedding of blood. Leviticus 3 verse 2 says, "Then Aaron's sons, the priests, will splatter its blood, because the sacrifice has now been killed. They will splatter its blood against all sides of the altar." Now that doesn't seem very fair at all. The animal that you just confessed upon, that animal is now sliced and diced and dead. So what's going on here? This sacrifice is now no longer perfect. The sacrifice now has all of my mess and my mistakes and my mayhem on it. The sacrifice, who had no sin, has now become sinful. And so, Ezekiel says that the soul that sins is the soul that dies. So you have to take that soul and the body of that sacrificial animal, and you must then take the blood of that animal once it's dead, and you splatter it against all sides of the altar. Now, Leviticus, as we're going to find out during these next 6 weeks, is a very bloody book. The word blood appears 89 times in the book of Leviticus, and why is that? Well, Hebrews chapter 9, verse 22 tells us that without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. So we need a perfect sacrifice. A sacrifice without defect, without any blemishes. We need to come clean. We need to confess our part in the mess, and then we need the blood to be shed. And then what? Well, remember, I told you A plus B plus C equals something. This is God's equation, God's gift of shalom. A plus B plus C equals a celebration of shalom. Perfect sacrifice plus confession of sin plus blood shed, then you celebrate shalom. Hey, look, things are back together again in my life. God has repaired, restored, renewed. And this is how Leviticus chapter 3 continues, this celebration of shalom. The priest must present part of this peace offering as a special gift to the Lord. Part. Now, that's an important word here. Not all of the sacrifice goes to God. Only a part of it goes to God. What part does God get in this shalom offering? Well, God's part includes all of the fats around the internal organs, the 2 kidneys and the fat around them near the loins, the long lobe of the liver. These must be removed with the kidneys, and Aaron's sons will burn them on top of the burnt offering on the wood burning on the altar. So what's up with God getting all the fat? I know what some of you are probably thinking. I think it as well. God is telling us here, don't eat fat, right? I mean, it's right here in the Bible. Of course, it's not that simple. In the Old Testament, the fatty part of the animal was considered to be the most precious part, the best piece of the animal. So God gets the best. God gets the fat. The fat around the organs, the fat around the kidneys, the long lobe of the liver, all of that stuff, implying that there's stuff left over. Left over for who? The worshipers. The worshipers. And what are they going to do with everything that's left over? Well, they're going to have a meal. They have a celebration. They have a banquet. They have a feast. They have a celebration of shalom. But remember, this is just a shadow. Wouldn't it be really cool if we had the real picture of all of this? Wouldn't it just be awesome if we didn't just have this shadow, we had the real deal? We do. We do, and here it is. You see in this picture, it's Jesus and doubting Thomas in the upper room the week after Easter, and here is no shadow. It's no shadow of shalom here. No, this is the real deal. You heard it in the gospel reading just this morning 3 times. 3 times in John chapter 20, verse 19, verses 21 and 26. 3 times Jesus says what? Well, in Hebrew, it's shalom aleichem. And in English, it's translated as peace be to you. Peace to you. Can you imagine that these Jews, these disciples, imagine what they were thinking at this point when Jesus accents God's gift of shalom. You need to understand that the first book that Jews learn today, and also back in Jesus' day, the first book that they learned was what? That would be the book of Leviticus. Imagine what these Jews are thinking when Jesus says, peace to you. Shalom aleichem. Oh, they're thinking, there's the perfect sacrifice. He's the one who takes all of my mess away. Oh, look at that gaping hole in his side. The blood was shed, and now it's time for a celebration of shalom. The 17th century Italian Baroque artist painted this beautiful masterpiece. He had only one name. He's one of my favorite artists. Maybe you've heard of him. His name is Caravaggio. Caravaggio paints Jesus and doubting Thomas, and I want you to look at what he does in this painting. Jesus not only invites Thomas to put his finger into his side, but in Caravaggio's painting, Jesus actually helps Thomas. He guides his hand into his side. Now, I want you to understand that in 17th century European art, this painting by Caravaggio was groundbreaking. Up to this point in European Christian art, it was always done with halos around Jesus and with clouds in the background. It always looked so mythical and so otherworldly, but not Caravaggio, not in this painting here, no way. He breaks new ground in showing how very real the resurrection is. This is no myth, folks. This is no fairy tale here. No, Caravaggio says that this is flesh and blood. You can actually put your finger into the Savior's side. This is the real deal. In fact, if you were to look very closely at this painting, Caravaggio has actually put dirt on Thomas's thumb and underneath his fingernail. So, a perfect sacrifice, plus a confession of sins, plus the shedding of blood equals what? Well, it equals a celebration of shalom. You know what was happening with these disciples when Jesus showed up after Easter? They were probably having their 19th nervous breakdown. They were in the upper room with doors locked for fear, anxiety, dread of the Jews. They just couldn't go on until Jesus showed up. Until Jesus shows up with real flesh and blood and a body that had been dead and is now alive forevermore. Talk about shalom. Shalom, previewed in Leviticus chapter 3, stunningly delivered in John chapter 20 to people who are stressed out, wondering if Humpty Dumpty could ever be put back together again. And Jesus says not once, not twice, but 3 times, Shalom Aleichem, peace to you. What might we be waiting upon? We've tried the bigger house. Maybe you've tried that brighter blouse. Or maybe you think, well, I need another spouse. Or maybe you've said to yourself, I'll quit being such a big, lazy louse. And you've discovered that none of that works. Well, this does. This works. Shalom works every single time. That's why Jesus is called, a great verse, Isaiah 9, verse 6, you shall call him Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Sar Shalom in Hebrew, Prince of Peace. That's Jesus, the Prince of Peace. So what is Easter? Well, if Easter is anything, Easter is a celebration of shalom. How can we be so sure? Well, we're going to go back to Isaiah 53, verse 5 here. The punishment that brought us peace was upon him. By his wounds, by his resurrection, we are healed. So I invite you today, indeed I invite you every day, because every day is a day to celebrate shalom. Because Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. Amen. Let's celebrate that with our next hymn.